Okay, so we're talking about heart physiology, and I talked about the depolarization, which is kind of an impulse that travels through the heart. And when we talk about that depolarization and the traveling of that sometimes referred to as an action potential or an impulse through the heart, this is what is referred to as a conduction. So conduction of an impulse. So I'll put that of an impulse. And it's intrinsic versus extrinsic. So this would be versus extrinsic. Extrinsic would be innervation by the nervous system. It might also be hormones that are on the outside, like adrenaline, that could cause an increase in heart rate. But the intrinsic is simply what sets the heart rate and what causes the initiation of that contraction. And so we actually have a natural pacemaker in our heart that sets that pace of muscle contraction in the heart. So when we talk about this conduction, it is initiated by non-contractile cardiac muscle cells. And they're also autorhythmic. So I'll put that in parentheses. So they're a special type of cardiac muscle that can initiate its own impulse. And in fact, in some organisms, you can take the heart, like a turtle heart, you can take it out of the body and it will continue to beat outside of the body. So that is done by these autorhythmic cells that are non-contractile. And so they send a signal and they distribute those, that depolarization. So they distribute the depolarization so that the heart pumps efficiently. Okay, so let's look at this series of intrinsic conduction system. So up in the top part of your right atrium is what is referred to as the Cyanoatrial Node. This is also abbreviated as the SA node. And the SA node is what we call, quote unquote, your pacemaker. Now you can have artificial pacemakers put in that replace this SA node, the function of it. But the SA node generally will beat around 75 beats per minute. And then in order to speed up or slow down the heart rate, then you have extrinsic regulation. So the cyanoatrial node is kind of interesting. It actually will beat on its own about, or cause impulses on its own if it's like outside at about 100 beats per minute, but it is damped down by the autonomic nervous system, the parasympathetic division, which we'll talk about in a minute, to about 75 beats per minute. So we'll put just 75 beats per minute is your heart rate. Okay. This depolarization, you'll notice, travels from the right atrium also to the left atrium, and then it goes to what we call the Atrioventricular Node, or the AV node. This AV node actually delays the impulses. Delays impulses. And this is important because we don't want the depolarization to occur in the atria and the ventricles simultaneously, because then they would contract simultaneously. So we need the slight contraction of the atria to happen before the ventricles. So this allows for that to occur. And then it goes down into what is called the AV bundle. So I'll just write it, I'll abbreviate it. The AV bundle. This used to be called, it had a kind of a funny name. It was the bundle of His. HIS was the name of it. And then it goes into the bundle branches. And then I learned this next part as Purkinje fibers, but you could also say that these are actually part of the, I can't even remember the terms. Let's see if I can find it really quick. Subendocardial conducting network. So I think the Purkinje fibers, named after probably a person, are more interesting. That's a kind of an easier thing to remember. So the function of this, the AV bundle and the bundle branches, is to take that depolarization to the bottom of the ventricles. So we don't want the ventricles to contract from the top down, because what that would do is that would force blood to the bottom of the heart. So if blood is coming down and it's like forced to the bottom, what's going to happen is it's going to become very turbulent, and it's actually probably going to damage the heart wall. So what we want is the blood to simply be pumped up and out. And so in order for that to occur, the ventricles must start contracting from the bottom up. And that is just a really important part of this, this conduction system. If we look at the electrocardiogram, this can be abbreviated as ECG, or you might have heard it called the EKG, and you might have wondered, those are the same thing. But in German, cardio is with a K, and so hence EKG rather than ECG. And so this just looks at, this is actually looking at the movement of the depolarization through the heart. So looking at electrical, the depolarization impulse as it moves through the heart. And you guys are all probably familiar with this from television, or if you've ever been to the hospital when somebody's been hooked up to this. So it kind of looks like this. You have a wave here, and then you have a big spike, right? You might have always wondered what that was. And then you have another little wave here. And so it looks like that, right? So this first wave is actually called my P wave. And this is where we have atrial depolarization. So that's the first part where the atria depolarize and they would contract, right? And then this is what is called the QRS complex. So this is my QRS complex. And this is where the ventricles depolarize. So it'd be ventricular depolarization. So that's where the ventricles contract. And then this is called my T wave. And this is where the ventricles relax or become repolarized. So we also have atrial repolarization, but it would be during the same time that the ventricles are contracting. So we don't see it on the graph. And so we can get a measurement, right? We can get like a measurement of heart rate. We could also like measure the time between the P wave and the QRS, the timing between the QRS and the T, and all of those give cardiologists a really important information about whether or not the heart is working properly. And so let's look at an image of this. Okay, so this shows P, the QRS, and then T. So T should have a specific interval. There should be a specific amount of time. If the T is too late, then that'll cause problems. If the P is too early, then that will cause problems. And so this is just that movement of that electrical impulse. It's just showing the movement of the electrical impulses through the heart. So here again, just shows this very nicely. This is an image from your book where the SA node, when it starts sending its depolarization, that would be the P. This is where it's actually complete. And then QRS would be ventricular depolarization. And then the T wave is when the ventricles repolarize. So we can talk about what is called a normal sinus rhythm. This is one that is regulated by the cyanoatrial node. So that's why it's called the sinus rhythm, because it's from your pacemaker, your cyanoatrial node. And then we can also talk about what are called arrhythmias. So this is where the rhythm is off. And I think those got 2 R's in there. Let me just check. I always have a hard time with a rhythm as a name or as a word. Rhythm. Yep, there's 2 R's for some reason. Okay, so what this means is that it's without a proper rhythm. So anytime you have an A in front of a word, it's without a proper rhythm. So for example, if your SA node is not working, then you're not going to see a P wave, right? But interestingly, the AV node will take over. So your heart will be beating abnormally slow here, 40 to 60 beats per minute. Here, where some of the P waves are not conducted through the AV node, so that there's too many P waves, right, is shown in this one, and that is called second-degree heart block. And then this one is very interesting. This one is called ventricular fibrillation, where it's just kind of like your heart electrical system is just going crazy, right? So what you would do when you have atrial ventricular fibrillation is you would use a defibrillator. And they have automatic ones now, right? Hanging on the walls, like right outside my door, there's one right there. So if somebody falls down and is having a heart attack and their heart is beating erratically, in order to reset the rhythm, then you would defibrillate it. So you would stop the heart with a shock, and then hopefully that shock will actually cause the normal rhythm to come back. If it doesn't, then this is a heart that is not pumping blood, and death would be very short to follow, right?